Let me begin by asking you to permit a small experiment. It will cost you 5 minutes, and in return, it will explain a war you have been fighting all your life without ever knowing that you declared it. Imagine that I give you, and everyone sitting here with us, a single instruction. For the next 5 minutes, I tell you, do not think of a white bear. And each time the bear appears in your mind against your will, you are to confess it honestly, to ring the little bell that stands on the table between us, so that everyone can hear. What do you suppose would happen in such a room? I have spent my life studying the movements of the human soul, and I can tell you without hesitation. Before the first minute is over, the bell is ringing almost without pause. The more sternly the company commands that one white image to stay away, the more persistently it returns, until the whole room is loud with bells and with helpless, embarrassed laughter. And now comes the part I want you to keep. The experiment never really ended. It is still running, and you are the room. Every time you order yourself to stop obsessing over a mistake, to stop replaying what someone said to you, to stop feeling an anxiety that has no right to appear at this hour of your life, you are repeating in the privacy of your own skull the very procedure that collapsed so publicly. And here is what has never occurred to you about it. The instruction was never what you believed it to be. It is not a remedy that has merely failed so far through weak execution. The instruction itself is the mechanism of failure. You have been giving it to yourself for years, perhaps for decades, and you have never once learned its name. Nor is it difficult to understand why we reach for such commands. Something in us believes that a feeling can be dismissed like a servant, that if anxiety appears at an inconvenient hour, this must mean there is something shameful about us, some defect that better people have long since corrected. So we address our inner world the way a harsh master addresses disobedient staff, and we mistake severity for strength. But severity toward the psyche is not strength. It is only the oldest and least examined of our defenses, a way of refusing to ask what the unwanted visitor has come to tell us. Decades before anyone thought to test such things with bells and stopwatches, I had already written down the law that stands behind them. In my 2 essays on analytical psychology, I gave it an old Greek name, enantiodromia, a running into the opposite. It is the principle that whatever is driven to an extreme transforms itself into its own opposite. Suppress a thought with enough violence and it does not disappear, it withdraws. It waits in the darkness, gathering everything your fear has fed it, and when it returns holding the reins. Understand, this is not a metaphor for your sleepless nights, for the spiral that opens at 2 in the morning, for the argument you keep rehearsing in the bath. It is the exact mechanics of a war you have been losing for years, losing, above all, without ever realizing that you were the one who declared it. And what I wish to place in your hands today is not a strategy for winning that war. Victory within it is impossible, for every new offensive only recruits new soldiers for the enemy. What I wish to show you is the only means by which, in half a century of listening to the unconscious, I found such a war could be brought to an end. A movement of the soul I called the transcendent function, and the precise manner in which it can be awakened the next time such a thought rises against you. Because the true question was never how to win this war at last. It is what happens on the day you simply stop appearing on the battlefield. Enantiodromia. That is the word for what fills a room with bells, and it is the word for what happens, unfailingly, every single time you command yourself not to feel. I did not invent it. I borrowed it from Heraclitus, who noticed the same movement in the nature of things 25 centuries before my time. Whatever is pushed far enough toward one extreme passes over into its opposite. Consider what this destroys. You have believed that forcing a thought out of your mind was an act of control. It is nothing of the sort. It is the very mechanism that guarantees the thought will return, and return amplified, for the unconscious does not distinguish between the command "think this" and the command "never think this." Either way, your passion has told it what matters. Either way, your own dread has marked the forbidden image as the one thing worth remembering. In my consulting room, I watched this play out so often, with so many different souls, that I could no longer call it coincidence. I began to call it a law. I wrote that the only person who escapes what I called the grim law of enantiodromia is the one who deals with an unwanted content of the psyche in some other way than repression, for repressed, it merely attacks him from the rear. I ask you to read those words more than once. I did not say, the one who fights the content head-on and defeats it. I said, the one who refuses the fight altogether, and instead sets the unwanted thing down plainly before himself, as something separate from who he is. Most people do precisely the opposite. The intrusive thought arrives, the spike of dread, the shame that comes uninvited, and at once they go to war with it, with all their force, at the front door. And it never occurs to them that this is exactly how it gets in from behind. In my lectures, I often sketched a certain modern figure. Think of the man of affairs, the man of relentless effort, who has committed himself so totally to one extreme, to control, to rationality, to the endless optimization of his own life, that the intensity of his commitment is quietly building the pressure for its collapse. He is not a weak man, and that is what makes him instructive. He is strong exactly where consciousness can be strong, and his strength is what loads the spring. But you need nothing so dramatic to verify the law for yourself. You have only to remember the last time you decided, with all the will you could gather, that you would simply stop thinking about something, and then you must remember honestly how long that decision lasted. One-sidedness, you see, is how most human identity is built, and it is built for understandable reasons. Early and often we are rewarded for the qualities that please our surroundings, and early and often we learn that other qualities bring punishment or the withdrawal of love. So we assemble a self out of what is acceptable and banish the rest, and we call the banishment discipline, or virtue, or simply growing up. The banished parts do not die of it. They go underground intact, and they pull against us with a force proportionate to everything we have built above them. So let me give you something to watch for, beginning today. The next time you catch yourself suppressing, truly pushing, gritting your teeth against an image or a memory, do not judge yourself. Observe. Time how long it takes for the thought to come back. And when it returns, as it will, notice whether it comes back louder than before, more detailed, more insistent, wearing new arguments you have not yet answered. If you find that it does, you are not witnessing some personal failure of discipline. You are witnessing an enantiodromia in operation, alive, inside your own skull. The rebound is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is proof that the law works exactly as I described it. Whether or not you have ever read a page I wrote, the law does not require your belief. It requires only your attention. But naming the law is not enough. Knowing that suppression recoils does not yet tell you where the energy goes when you push a thought down, for it does not vanish into nothing, nor does it simply bounce back at random. It goes somewhere specific, into a region of the psyche I spent my life mapping, the region that collects everything you have refused to let yourself feel and waits patiently for its turn. Most people assume the mind contains something like a key of deletion. Press hard enough on a feeling and it is gone forever. I came to a very different conclusion. The mind, as I understand it, resembles a house with a cellar, and nothing you carry down those stairs disappears. It only changes address. It settles into the darkness beneath the house and waits there, with infinite patience, for the lights to go out upstairs. This is the point where my two essays take on their deeper meaning. What I was describing there was not only a law of reversal. I was describing where the reversed energy goes. I called that region the shadow, and I ask you to hear the word carefully, for it has been badly misunderstood. The shadow is not evil, and it is not pathology. It is simply the disowned half of everything your conscious mind has decided to stand for. Whatever the daylight self rejects, whatever cannot be reconciled with the image you present to the world and to yourself, all of it is received and kept below. I wrote that the conscious mind is on top and the shadow underneath, and that just as high always longs for low and hot for cold, so all consciousness seeks its unconscious opposite, lacking which it is doomed to stagnation, congestion, and ossification. Sit with that last word for a moment. Congestion. Not collapse, not disappearance. Congestion. pressure with nowhere to go, a standing water of the soul in which every kind of hidden sickness eventually breeds. Apply this now to the thought you have been trying to kill. Every ounce of force you spend commanding yourself not to feel anxious does not evaporate when the thought goes quiet for a while. It is rerouted. And because psychic energy, as I understand it, always seeks its compensatory opposite, it tends to resurface exactly where you have posted no guard. It appears as tension in your jaw that you cannot explain. It appears as irritability towards someone who did nothing wrong. It appears as a wave of dread about something entirely unrelated to what you suppressed an hour earlier. This is not superstition, and it is not mystery. It is structure. I watched it happen, clinically, with such consistency that I stopped treating it as chance and began treating it as mechanism. Whatever you refuse to let move through consciousness directly will move through you indirectly, disguised, and usually at a worse moment than the one you were trying to protect. Here, then, is a practice that takes less than a minute. The next time you notice an irritation, a tightness, a free-floating worry that seems to come from nowhere, do not investigate the new feeling first. Ask instead, what did I refuse to feel in the last hour? Not the last week, the last hour. 9 times out of 10 you will find the true source sitting exactly where you left it. The phone call you avoided thinking about. The criticism you brushed off too quickly. The sadness you converted into busyness the moment it appeared. That is not coincidence. That is the shadow finding a side door because you locked the front one. Now you can see why willpower alone was never going to be the answer. Willpower is a strategy for the front door. It can hold a thought at the entrance for a while, sometimes for hours, occasionally for days, and you know the peculiar exhaustion of such sentry duty. But my whole life's work was built on watching what happens to the energy that is held back and never processed. It does not wait patiently for you to feel strong enough to deal with it. It finds the unguarded exit. So the real problem was never the strength of your discipline. It was the location of your effort. You have been standing at the wrong door, guarding a thought that was never going to leave by the way it came in, while somewhere else in you, something quietly absorbs its charge and grows strong on it. And this raises a harder question than the one you began with. If fighting the thought directly only relocates it, what does it mean to stop fighting it at all? Here my map becomes genuinely strange for many people, because the two most common responses to a painful thought, believing that you are it and battling to make it disappear, turn out to be the same mistake wearing different clothes. You do this more than you think. Somewhere in the last week a thought found you, a spike of anxiety, a flash of anger, a wave of shame, and you did not merely experience it. For a few seconds at least, you became it. Not anxiety is happening in me, but I am anxious. The collapse of the distance between yourself and the content passing through you is so swift and so automatic that most people never notice it has occurred. It is automatic because the ego, that little center we call I, is acquisitive by nature. It grabs whatever arises in its field and claims it as property. A mood appears, and at once the ego says, my mood, my failing, my condition, because owning everything feels like being someone. And so there is a hidden fear underneath the act of letting a thought be just a thought. The fear that if I do not hold on to whatever passes through me, I will not know who I am. But that fear mistakes the furniture of the house for its owner. So I had to teach my patients a distinction most people never make, and I put it to you as plainly as I put it to them. One must learn to differentiate what is ego and what is non-ego, the parts of the psyche that are genuinely you, and the parts that are simply passing through the territory you happen to occupy. Here is what is uncomfortable. Fighting a thought and becoming a thought feel like opposites. They are not. When you identify with a thought, you fuse with it completely, and because it now appears to be you, you are left with no option but to destroy it in order to feel like yourself again. When you fight a thought, you have technically separated from it, but you remain fused to it through the fight itself, spending the whole of your attention on its defeat, letting it occupy your hours as completely as if you had embraced it. Different posture, same captivity. In both cases, the thought is running the show, and you are either its hostage or its negotiator. never simply the person sitting quietly in the room who does not have to take the call. This is no quarrel over words. It changes what you actually do the next time dread shows up uninvited. Try this, and try it precisely. Instead of saying, "I am panicking," say silently to yourself, "Panic is moving through me right now," not as a trick, as an accurate report. The first sentence identifies you with a weather system. The second locates you correctly, as the sky it is passing through. Most people resist this at first because it feels like giving up. It is the opposite of giving up. Giving up would be obeying the thought, letting the anxiety cancel the plan, letting the shame dictate the apology, letting the anger write the letter. What I propose is neither surrender nor combat. It is the third option, and the reason no one offered it to you when you were young is simply that no one around you had heard of it either. Notice, too, that this is not about calming the thought down. The anxiety does not necessarily grow quieter the moment you stop fusing with it or fighting it. What changes is your address. You are no longer standing inside the storm, issuing orders to the wind. You are standing somewhere the storm can be observed, instead of somewhere it must be won or lost. This is harder than either of the old options, at least at first, because both identification and combat come with the comforting sense of doing something. Witnessing, in its first attempts, can feel like doing nothing at all. Do not trust that feeling. I came to consider this very shift, this capacity to differentiate oneself from a psychic content without needing to destroy the content, one of the true marks of psychological maturity. It is not a passive stance. It is among the hardest labors the soul performs. And yet even this leaves the real mechanics unanswered. If you are neither to fight the thought nor dissolve into it, what happens in the space where the fighting used to be? I had a precise answer, and it is not silence. It is a conversation, one that I insisted must be held on genuinely equal terms, between two parties who have never been properly introduced. In the year 1916, I wrote a sentence that many people have found strange, that in such work, it is exactly as if a dialogue were taking place between two human beings with equal rights. I was not being poetic. I meant it literally, as a technical description of what a healthy mind does with a conflict it cannot resolve by force. Consider the assumption this overturns. Having heard me say that fighting backfires and that becoming the thought is its own prison, the natural guess is that the answer must be some kind of neutral distance, polite indifference, a shrug, waiting the feeling out. That guess is wrong, and I want to be specific about why. Indifference is not dialogue. Dialogue requires two positions that actually speak to one another, each one taken seriously enough to answer and be answered. And I must tell you why this demands something of us that the inner tyrant resents. To give the fear a seat at the table feels, to the ego, like handing over the house. But giving a position the equal right to speak has never been the same as giving it the right to rule. Respect is not obedience, it is the condition of understanding. The mechanism that makes this exchange possible I called the transcendent function, and I described its workings almost mechanically. The shuttling to and fro of arguments and effects, the confrontation of position and counterposition generates an attention charged with energy. Notice what I am not saying. I am not saying that the conscious position must win, nor am I saying that the unconscious position, the fear, the shame, the impulse, gets to dictate the outcome. I am saying that something must happen between the two, and it can only happen when both are granted the same standing you would give a person you genuinely respect. Here is what that looks like outside a learned paper. Take the anxious thought you practiced witnessing, and tonight, go one step further. Put the dialogue on paper, literally, with a pen if you can. Write the anxious position's case in a single sentence, letting it speak plainly, without caricature. Then write your calmer position's honest reply. Then let the anxious position answer that reply. 3 or 4 exchanges, no more. You are not debating to win. You are doing on paper exactly what I described as happening inwardly, shuttling the argument back and forth until something shifts. Most people never try it, because it feels absurd to argue with their own dread in writing. It feels absurd only because no one ever told you that this is a documented operation of the psyche and not a coping trick. I did not consider it optional. I spoke of the transcendent function as the most significant factor in the psychological process, not a technique for calm days, but the very engine by which a mind changes. This is also where willpower and witnessing both run out of road. Willpower tries to kill the thought. Witnessing teaches you not to fuse with it, but neither tells you what to do with the two positions once they stand separated, simply sitting there, still in conflict, still unresolved. The transcendent function answers that question directly. You let them speak, genuinely speak, until neither one is simply repeating itself. And something does happen when that exchange is allowed to run its course. It is not compromise. It is not one side quietly losing. I gave it a name stranger than either outcome, a third position, one that existed in neither the conscious argument nor the unconscious one, born entirely from the friction between them. And here I must warn you of the misunderstanding that ruins the exercise. Something new is not the same thing as something resolved. Most people begin the written dialogue expecting a verdict. Anxiety was right, or anxiety was wrong. That is not what you are waiting for, and I was exact about it. The confrontation of the two positions generates a tension charged with energy, and out of that tension comes a living third thing, not a logical stillbirth according to the principle of the excluded middle, not a deadlock split evenly between them, but a movement born of the suspension between the opposites themselves, a living birth that leads to a new level of being and a new situation. And why does the third thing arrive so quietly? Because it is not produced by either party to the quarrel, and it speaks in neither of their voices. It comes from somewhere deeper in you than the argument, from the wholeness that contains both positions and is therefore greater than either. Wholeness, in my experience, rarely shouts. It prefers the single sentence that changes the temperature of a room. How, then, will you recognize it? It rarely announces itself. Usually it is not a solution at all. It is a sentence that surprises you, one that neither your anxious voice nor your reasonable voice had spoken in any of the earlier exchanges, arriving almost sideways, often quieter than you expected. Go back over your written dialogue and look for the line, perhaps in the third or fourth exchange, that does not sound like either of the two characters you started with. That line is the transcendent function doing its work. This stops being abstract the moment you carry it beyond private anxiety. The same mechanism can soften a marriage quarrel that has calcified into a script, or a family rift that has run on the same two accusations for 10 years. In such wars, both sides are usually negotiating for victory, when what is needed is the patience to wait for the third thing neither of them has said yet. So let me distill the practice for you. The next time you find yourself in a disagreement that keeps circling, with a partner, with a parent, with yourself, resist the urge to find the winning argument. Ask instead what a third position would sound like, one that is not your case and is not theirs. It often arrives as a single unexpected sentence. That sentence is worth more than being right.